on. We'll call the committee to order and ask the prime sponsor of House Bill 203 to come and introduce himself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Representative Jess Edwards, representing Rockingham District 31. That's Auburn, Candia, Chester, and Deerfield. I'm the only sponsor on House Bill 203. The reason for that is because this is such an obvious change and update to current requirements that it didn't seem like I needed to deploy an army to help convince you. If you look at it, what it does is it establishes that a length of time where the information needs to be available of being at least 7 days. It updates the fact that some of our counties will use the sheriffs to deliver the packages rather than just having them mailed out. So this makes that legal, that practice legal. And it says that instead of having the budget available at the county courthouse, which may have worked in the 1800s, we're just going to hang this on the county website where people would expect it to be. So, so that's really it. It's just, I think, a very simple update to current statute.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you. Kate?
Thank you, members of the, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kate Horgan, representing the New Hampshire Association of Counties. As Representative Edwards stated, we did request for him to put this bill in. It only applies to Rockingham and Hillsborough. That's the only section that it does apply to, it has ever applied to. As you know, being members of this committee, the county statutes apply to some, but not to all, because not every county is on a fiscal year. Some counties are on a calendar year. So this is just a very simple update to their statute. The statute originally said that they had to deliver and have the hearing on the same day, which gives no time for the county delegation to actually review what the commissioner's proposed budget is. This gives them time to finish, deliver the budget, and then within 7 days they will have a public hearing. That is all this bill does. It makes it very simple and clarifies the language that is in statute. We did work closely with Representative Powers and Representative Turcott on making sure the language was appropriate and worked for both Hillsborough and Rockingham delegation members. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none,
Thank
you
you
very much. That is the last one who has signed up. Is there anyone else who would like to testify on this bill? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. And we have about, according to that clock, we have 6 minutes for the next one. Our numbers being depleted, we'll hold off for a little bit, trying to exec anything. All right, my clock just flipped over to 9:15, so we will introduce House Bill, I believe it's 237 is the next one on the list, and ask the prime sponsor to come forward and introduce herself.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable committee members. As a prime sponsor, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce to you today House Bill 237. For the record, I am Representative Diane Power. I represent Hillsborough District 36, the towns of Brookline, Mason, and Greenville. House Bill 237 is a simple, straightforward, bipartisan bill that clearly establishes a date to evaluate assets for the purpose of determining eligibility for property tax exemptions for the disabled, the deaf or severely hearing impaired, and for the elderly. Under current statute, property owners may be eligible for these tax exemptions based on their income and assets. So the application window begins on January 1st, and it extends to the statutory deadline of April 15th of that same year. For the purpose of evaluating the applicant's income, the statute clearly defines the time frame as the prior calendar year. However, for the purpose of evaluating the applicant's level of assets, the time frame is at the time of application. So what happens is this results in 105 days from January 1st to April 15th for the municipality to measure the applicant's assets. Undoubtedly, this creates inconsistency and unequal treatment both within the municipality as well as across the state. This bill clearly establishes the date of December 31st in the calendar year preceding that April 1st for the evaluation of the assets. This simple technical change in the law will ensure that every applicant within a municipality as well as across the state is evaluated by the same standards in determining eligibility for these property tax exemptions, which brings both consistency and fairness in administration. And one other thing that I'd like to note is I did put in language in the bill so that if this bill does get signed into law, that municipalities will not need to readopt these tax exemptions. So with that, concludes my bill introduction, Mr. Chair.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have two people on the list. Natch?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. H. Grace from the Municipal Association. We support this bill. As described by the sponsor, it's a very simple technical change. We believe that taxpayers across municipalities should be treated equally no matter where they may reside, and this will clarify existing law to ensure that the asset evaluation lines up with the other provisions of the assessing laws.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Jim?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Jim Michaud. I'm the Chief Assessor for the Town of Hudson. I am in support of all the prior comments from the two speakers. I believe that this is also necessary to ensure that there's uniformity within the community and across the state in terms of the measurement of assets for purpose of the elderly, disabled, and deaf exemption. And I'm here for any questions. I'm a practicing assessor and use this statute every year.
Questions from committee members? Okay, know that there was a discussion of this at the Assessing Standards Board last Friday, that they spoke in favor of it as best I remember. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anyone else that didn't sign up and wants to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Do we have an idea of when Senator Susi might be available? I know that they were meeting on commerce, right? Next hearing isn't until 9:30, so we may be back a little bit before that if we find out information about Senator Susie, but until then, we'll The time being 9:30, we will go to our next bill, which is House Bill 284. And I don't see Representative Edwards. Are you here to introduce the bill? We don't need to read the testimony into the record. It is part of the record, so we'll let Representative Edwards speak. And if he does reference it, he can paraphrase it.
So thank you again, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Representative Jess Edwards, representing Rockingham District 31. That's Auburn, Candia, Chester, and Deerfield. I'm here to talk about House Bill 284, and I'm sort of a strap hanger hanging on to this bill. I had a bill in the House that met with untimely confusion, and it kind of was going to die in your sister committee over in the House until Representative Schuett, I think in a great act of nonpartisanship, not bipartisanship, nonpartisanship, she recognized that it was a good thing for us to do and responsive to Rockingham County's request. And so she added as a non-germane into an ED&A bill the section of 284 that starts on line 17 of page 1 and runs through line 12 of page 2. That had been a non-germane amendment to the base bill, and it's a simple one. It basically allows Rockingham to go out for non-competitive bids if the purchase amount is under $10,000. And when I had asked for some information on what it costs typically to do an RFP, the number that I was given, depending on the county and the person responding, ranged from $600 to $850 just to prepare an RFP package. And so the thought was, since this $5,000 amount hadn't been raised, I think, since something like 1998, and the cost of processing an RFP was so high that it was just time to do an inflation adjustment on this. So that's the back half. I'm not able to speak to the front half of the bill.
Okay. Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. And since you were mentioned, Representative, we'll ask you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On committee, I'm Diane Schuett. I represent Merrimack 12, the town of Pembroke. And yes, I saw the worth in the bill that Representative Edwards had originally presented to House, Municipal, and County Government, and talked to my chair, who agreed that it was an important thing for the counties. And so we added it, and the bill with that amendment passed the House on the consent calendar, so there was obviously no argument against it. I will speak slightly to the underlying bill, which I know the Association of Counties is here to explain in more detail, but both pieces of this bill are supported by all 10 counties and I think are worthwhile for them.
Questions? I think we're good to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Kate?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kate Horgan. I'm representing the New Hampshire Association of Counties. Yes, we support it. Just to add to Representative Edwards' piece on the second half, this will be the last competitive bidding raising of the threshold that you will see from us this year. It's very simple. It just raises the amount for all counties from $5,000 to $10,000. The first half of the bill is also very simple. Some of our counties have applied for or responded to RFPs that the state has given, and the state has been unable to share information as to why an RFP has been canceled. So this, the first half of the bill would allow someone who is issued an RFP as a political subdivision or the state to say, hey, all the bids came in too high. That's why we didn't do it. They will not release any proprietary information whatsoever. It is very simple. It just allows them to explain why a bid was canceled or why an RFP was canceled. I'm happy to take any questions.
Senator Perkins Cogan.
I have a couple.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So, I guess I'll start with the second half of the bill since
Yep.
that's where we seem to be starting. I just wondered whether you guys had considered removing, to your point about the statutes kind of being, a patchwork, removing this special provision on Hillsborough County and just drafting it into the.
So, Nursing Home Administrator David Ross was unable to be here today, but I did email the committee first thing this morning his testimony. Hillsborough County wants to keep that language. They are very adamant that they want that language. That's how they want to do RFPs. They can do that. They are a very large county. Coos County is probably a quarter of the size of Hillsborough County. They don't have the budget or the means to do that. So our position has been if Hillsborough County wants to keep that, that's fine. Just increase the threshold across all boards so that it applies to all counties. But please do not apply that to Hillsborough, or apply Hillsborough County statute to Coos or other counties because it could be very difficult for them to implement.
Okay, that makes sense. A follow-up, if I may, Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
So this repeal for Rockingham County, would that accomplish something similar to sort of?
Yep, so it just loops all of Rockingham's very broad language to all the other 9 counties, and all the other 9 counties are very happy to use that language. It doesn't lay out specific, this is the steps you have to do. It just says that it applies to all offices at the deed. So the repeal language is actually in that bill, the same language. It just applies to all other 8 counties, including Rockingham, making it 9,
okay.
if that makes sense.
It does,
Okay.
yep. And then just one more, if I may, Chair.
Certainly,
So
certainly.
moving backwards through the bill here,
Yep.
in section 2, I guess, I'm thinking of a public official trying to act under this statute, and I guess I probably would have approached this by making certain information subject to 91A, where we sort of have, extensive procedures. I feel like the language, nothing in this chapter shall be construed as a justification to avoid answering questions posed by the public. There's a little more value in there than there is, sort of procedure. So I wondered if you guys had that discussion in the House, or if you'd be open to.
We had
change
not,
like that.
but if you wanted to change it so that it just, nothing shall compromise 91A, I don't see an issue with that, but I would defer to Representative Schuett because it was her committee who
Yeah.
saw the bill originally.
Okay, then I should have asked you the question, but, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Additional questions? Compare and contrast this with House Bill 75, House Bill 83, House Bill 87.
So this only applies to competitive bidding for the counties. Those other bills that you mentioned that this committee has already passed apply to different competitive bidding statutes, such as personal property and other sections of law. So this is a separate section of statute. And so you don't necessarily want the personal property limit to be 10,000. That probably doesn't make sense, but the competitive bidding one does, because even your county nursing homes can't buy a washing machine for $10,000 right now. And it's something, if it's broken, you got to get it replaced. It's not a choice. The county delegations still have control over the budget, so it's not like you can go out and buy $10 million washing machines. It just speeds up the process and allows competitive bidding to be slightly more effective for the counties.
So the limits in here, are they compatible with or differ from
They're different.
the ones that we did?
Yes, they are different. They are separate sections of statute and they are separate
What I'm looking for is if I put 25,000 in the other bills.
Yep.
And I only have 10,000
Yep.
in this, why the difference?
Because I believe that, so the 25,001 is the capital improvements to buildings. Buildings obviously cost more money. So you want that threshold to be higher. If the roof has caved in, you want to be able to fix that quickly. Competitive bidding would be more along the lines of things within the facility, not structural, which is what the $25,000 limit is.
Additional questions from any of the committee members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brian?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Brian Chiricello. I noticed that you didn't attempt my last name, which is okay. I am...
As little as I can.
Yep,
You know?
no problem. I see some familiar faces that I've known. I did 5 terms as a state rep from 2010 to 2020. And now currently I am a Rockingham County Commissioner, chairman of that. And I want to thank Representative Edwards for listening to Rockingham County's request for this the second portion I'm going to be speaking on behalf of. As many people know, Rockingham County is the second largest county in the state. And what we do is we actually provide Meals on Wheels. We do all the Meals on Wheels for the county through the county kitchen. And so if you can think of all the supplies that we use, $5,000 is really not a lot. We looked at that and said, when's the last time the 5,000 was placed? And I believe it was 1998. So we just did the inflationary increase, and it basically came out to like $9,200, and we just rounded up to 10, which made sense. It streamlines the process for us at the county. And then all the other counties liked the idea and thought it was a good idea as well. So I'm just here in support of that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Comments from committee members, questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Schuett, you were invoked in one of the questions. If you'd like to have a second bite at the apple here, we'd certainly take any input that you have on the
Well, I will
issue.
just say, I am chair of the Merrimack County delegation, and my county administrator has previously testified in favor of both sections of the bill. I will point out that Hillsborough County has, if you look in the statute, has quite a few hoops that they have to jump through to do competitive bidding. And they requested that one additional line, so that's why that was added. And as you heard, Rockingham County sort of started the ball rolling on that second half with their request to have that repeal. That's the best insights I can give you as to how this whole thing became formulated. And I will tell you that, yes, all the counties were pressing for this because quite often they'd put out a bid for 5,000 and nobody was even responding because it's too low. People just are not responding to those kinds of bids anymore. They want a higher bid, even for a contract for something simple. So I hope that helps.
All right, questions from the committee members? Thank you. Was there anyone else that didn't sign up that wants to testify? Not seeing any. We'll close the public hearing, and we've got about 45 seconds before the next. So we will change gears.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to introduce House Bill 392 relative to constitutional convention procedures for delegates.
Thank you, Senator.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, distinguished committee members. My name is Ken Quinn. I'm from Bridgeton, Maine. I submitted my testimony online last night. I'm not sure if you have a copy of that. If not, I will.
We have copies,
Okay, great. Thank you.
so please do not read it, paraphrase it.
Yeah, I'm here on my own behalf, not representing the organization I work for. However, it's kind of a selfish motive because I am working on an Article 5 convention for congressional term limits that the American people overwhelmingly support. 82% of the Americans support this. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of hope that Congress is going to propose limiting their own terms. In fact, Congress will be voting on our amendment in the coming months, and I can pretty much guarantee you it's going to fail. That is why these procedures for a convention are needed here in New Hampshire. I've been working on this for about 8 years now, and although I believe that a process of a convention is completely safe, I have testified a number of times in committees here in New Hampshire where I hear a lot of concerns from legislators that they're a little concerned about how the process would work. And so I feel this is a very good piece of legislation. It really narrows down the procedures on how appointing of delegates would be and the rules. And I think this would be very helpful in giving the freedom to legislators to focus more on the policy of an amendment than the actual process. The process is something that the country is very familiar with. In fact, New Hampshire, you lead the country using this procedure. New Hampshire has had the most conventions among all the states to either adopt a new constitution, which is not what this is about, or to propose amendments. You've had 2 conventions to adopt a new state constitution and 15 conventions to propose amendments to that constitution. Throughout those conventions, the delegates have proposed 197 amendments and ratified, the people have ratified 96 of them. This is a procedure that you are participating in on a regular basis. Every single year, there's a convention of states that New Hampshire sends delegates to, or commissioners. It's an official convention. It's designed not to propose amendments. It's uniform state laws that all 50 states participate in. And so this is a very familiar process that's being used. And so my recommendation would be to just to ease concerns for any legislators that are hesitant of using this process to get beyond the concerns there. I would recommend passage of HB 392. And with that, I will close and take any questions if you may have any.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Simon?
Representative, the primary sponsor is here also, if you'd like to take her first, or I can speak.
Called on you, Simon.
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Samuel Fieldman. I'm National Counsel for Wolfpack, and we're seeking to amend the U.S. Constitution to end the corrupting influence of money in politics. Thank you for speaking with me today. The bill that's before you is an incredibly uncontroversial bill for regulating the process. There are numerous safeguards in place over it with the checks and balances built into the system that relate to the courts, the Congress, the states themselves, as well as the delegates. What this bill does is add additional protection on top of the already many layers of protection built into that process to help the state of New Hampshire ensure that that it is properly regulating the delegate procedures. The procedures that are in there are in line with what New Hampshire did as a state when it regulated its own process under the Article 7 conventions that ratified the U.S. Constitution. It included a provision in there that one of the towns, Boscawen, recognized that it could bind its delegates to instructions and remove that delegate and replace that delegate with an alternate if they thought that that delegate was not going to proceed in the way that they wanted. That delegate told them that they would not have followed the instructions, and so they discussed whether or not to replace that delegate with an alternate, and they decided ultimately to allow that delegate to vote their conscience as opposed to replacing them with an alternate, though they recognized that option. And because of that one town, as well as a handful of others that did the same thing, the Constitution was ratified in New Hampshire, making it the 9th state, and putting the Constitution into effect. The process of regulating delegates in conventions under the U.S. Constitution was shown in place in New Hampshire as well as numerous other states, and it was also further shown in the next time that conventions were held under the U.S. Constitution in 1933 to ratify the 21st Amendment. There was a provision in Arizona that specifically called for invalidating a delegate's vote if they violate their oath and replacing them with an alternate. That language was then copied in the Electoral College bill in New Mexico, which was upheld in 2020 unanimously by the Supreme Court. After that decision by the Supreme Court, we saw renewed interest in what had already been happening in numerous states of having these kind of delegate regulation bills in the states that have that kind of provision, that gold standard provision. What we saw in 1933 was that states were kind of scrambling when Congress called for the ratification of the 21st Amendment by the convention process. States were scrambling to get laws in place that would do the job. And they did. The process worked phenomenally well. States were able to regulate the Article 5 ratification convention process just fine. But it would be a lot better and a lot easier if states have in place ahead of time a gold standard bill that has these kinds of provisions that ensure that there's no possible way that a delegate could do anything but follow their instructions. These kinds of regulations, not specifically at the state level, but comparable regulations at the federal level were endorsed by the American Bar Association, major politicians on both sides of the aisle. Among Democrats, we had people like Senator Schumer and President Biden both support this in the 80s and 90s. We had on the Republican side Orrin Hatch and Mitch McConnell supporting this back in the 80s and 90s, and passed the Senate unanimously twice with recommendations from the American Bar Association and other organizations. And the fact that it's so uncontroversial, whether you support a convention or you don't, and to be sure, some of the people who I mentioned did not support a convention, including Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell, but others did. But they favored this kind of regulation bill to ensure that the process, should it happen, whether you want it to or not, is handled in a way that is safe. And that's why it passed the committee on the House side unanimously, and why it also passed the House of Representatives here in New Hampshire unanimously. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions from committee members? Senator Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is more of a procedural question. So what would happen if a policy issue was raised during the convention, but it really wasn't discussed prior to that delegate being seated? Would, as a matter of, I guess, because they weren't approved or authorized to consider such, would they even be allowed to support the policy because of that, or how would that work?
No. So let me give you a short answer and then slightly more detail to give you a real-world example where we saw something like this happen. The short answer is no. If it's not within the scope of their the call for the convention, they would not be allowed to consider it. They would not be allowed to take any actions that furthered its consideration. If there were a vote in place about its consideration, they would be required to vote no. And if they didn't, then another delegate or the body that's put in place by the bill could call for their immediate invalidation of their vote and immediate replacement with an alternate. And a real-world scenario where we saw that, Florida is one of the few states that has a comparable process to the Article 5 limited convention process. Most states in their state constitutional conventions are unlimited, which is just the nature of the way states are not made up of cities and towns in the way that the federal government, the U.S. is made up of the states. So they tend to handle things differently, but Florida does have every 20 years a convention that's limited specifically to budgetary issues. And in 2008, there was a legitimate dispute about whether or not some of the issues that were brought up were within the scope of that or not. And that dispute was brought before the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court decided that some of the provisions that they passed in 2008 were within the scope of the budgetary issues, and some were not. The ones that were not allowed to go on for ratification.
Additional questions?
Just to follow up, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a procedure in place that if a new policy issue was raised, that the delegates able to perhaps get authority, or at least giving them guidance one way or another to A, vote against this, or two?
Sure. This is what I alluded to earlier with regard to what happened in the New Hampshire ratification conventions under Article 7. What happened in New Hampshire at the time was the delegates were sent, many of them with instructions to vote against ratification for the Constitution. And when they got to the convention, they realized that they should vote in favor of the Constitution, but they were bound by their instructions. So they suspended the convention, the delegates went home, and many of them sought new instructions. Similarly, the state legislature is responsible for instructing its delegates under the Article 5 convention process, including under this provision. And the state legislature could expand or contract the instructions to the delegates under that procedure. They're creatures of the legislature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, for hearing me today. I'm going to keep it really short and sweet. I think everybody else has all the other points are going to be covered, so I'm going to keep it to a very, very quick statement of my intent, essentially, in bringing this bill forward and why I hope that you all will support it. To be clear, this is not an Article 5 convention call. This is the solution to the fear and uncertainty that dissuades us from using what is essentially a constitutional right. Oh, I'm so sorry. Representative Jody Newell, representing Cheshire 4 in Keene. It is not entirely within the power of this body to decide whether or not there is a convention. What is within our power is to protect ourselves from contributing to a corrupt one. So this bill lays out democratic processes for electing delegates, prohibits delegates with potential conflicts of interest, establishes an oath as well as a process and legal consequences for straying from their mandate, which is essentially the will of the people of New Hampshire. With that, I'll kindly pass it on to members of the public who'd like to speak.
Questions? I have one question for you. Is there a particular issue that you would like to see the Constitution amended to address?
Sure. Actually, I first came to these halls speaking to senators and representatives about the issue of money in politics and using this as kind of a last-ditch tool. And the reason why I felt that rose to the level is because this tool is essentially for something that is explicitly something that the will of the people, that the people want to be changed, but the people who are tasked with making that change are directly affected by it. And so money in politics is something that directly affects the people in Congress who, through the other route of Article 5, making constitutional change, that those people who are tasked with that are directly affected by it. It would negatively influence them. And so that was the issue that I'm here for. But as I said, I'm not here calling for an Article 5 convention today. What I am doing is I'm trying to respond to the concerns that I heard when I was here speaking to senators and representatives about this, about the uncertainty, and trying to at least make sure that we are protecting ourselves in the event that, like I said, other states and other organizations for various issues, if they do indeed get to the point where they call an Article 5 convention, at least we know that that our delegates will be, by necessity, they will maintain their integrity and their participation will reflect the will of the people of New Hampshire.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much for coming in. I believe there is a Miss Debbie Augustine
sign up to speak? In support.
I'm kind of new at this, so please bear with me. My name is Debbie Augustine, and I live in Kentucky, New Hampshire, and I'm here to ask you to support House Bill 392. Since retiring in June of 2020, I've been volunteering with Wolfpack, an organization committed to restoring free and fair elections. But long before that, and especially since my granddaughter was born 10 years ago, I had become extremely frustrated with the shameless corruption in Congress and with its blind allegiance to the large special interest donors. I was also angry that so many of them spent so much of their time fundraising for re-election when they should be passing meaningful legislation for their constituents. Unfortunately, a lot of us have already resigned ourselves to the fact that this is just the way it is. But should the future of democracy for our kids and grandkids belong to the highest bidders too? House Bill 392 spells out the regulatory process for delegates of an Article 5 convention of the U.S. Constitution, which could ultimately help address critical issues such as campaign finance reform by means of a constitutional amendment. Passing this bill could help expedite a states-led effort to pressure Congress into dealing with the systemic corruption so heavily entrenched in our politics. And as we know too well, Congress won't be proposing any kind of anti-corruption legislation for itself anytime soon. We can show that New Hampshire means business when it comes to business as usual by passing House Bill 392. Our state, along with the other states, has the power to pressure Congress into fixing our broken campaign finance system, but only if we use it. I thank you for your service as legislators and respectfully urge you to support this important legislation. Thanks.
Any questions of Ms. Augustine? Seeing none, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on House Bill 392? Seeing none, I'm going to close this hearing. The chairman has asked that we return, if at all possible, at 10:30 a.m. Hopefully by then we can be in a position to execute some bills. Thank you.
Okay, we're out of recess. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? I have a motion by Senator Susie, seconded by Senator Abbas, to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? We are in executive session, trying to take up the bills that we heard this morning. Pretty much, there were, first three were pretty much non-controversial. Do I have any discussion prior to a motion on House Bill 203? Okay. Seeing none, do I have a motion on 203? We have an ought to pass by Senator Murphy,
Second.
seconded by Senator Perkins Quokka. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Move consent?
And Senator Susie moves consent, and seconded by Senator Murphy. Discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? And Senator Murphy, you will take this one out if you would. All right, the second one from this morning was House Bill 237, relative to the date sign of asset evaluation. Again, the testimony was fairly simple on this one. Is there any discussion prior to a motion? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Second.
We have Senator Murphy, seconded by Senator Perkins Quokka, ought to pass. And further discussion?
I was just going to comment, I think it makes sense to have a uniform determination date for assets as we do for income for our assessors.
Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Move consent?
We have a motion for consent from Senator Susie, seconded by Senator Murphy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Ayes have it. And Senator Perkins Quokka.
Oh, good. Sure.
Okay. Third bill from this morning, bid proposals. House Bill 284.
So on 284, Chair, I would be happy to do the work of trying to rephrase Section 2 as making some information subject to or carved out of 91A, which I personally think might be more helpful to our county administrators, but I'm open to conversation from the committee on that.
All right. So is it the will of the committee to put this one on hold for Senator Perkins Quokka to provide an amendment? All righty.
Just curious for the sake of discussion.
Absolutely.
What exemptions would you want or what provisions? Just ballpark what that might look like.
Yeah, I think it would, see, I mean, even in Section 1, it says, and information unrelated to other bids or bidders shall be available to the public, notwithstanding the provisions of RSA 91A:4. So, I mean, I think just having been on city council and known the challenges that staff has with sort of determining, what can be disclosed, I think where we have 91A, I'd like to lean on that as much as possible personally. So my intent would not be to change the type of information that Section 1 is trying to make available to the public, but rather just make sure it's clear once I get a chance to look at 91A.
I guess all I'm asking is,
Yeah.
if we're not going to make any changes under 91A, that's what would apply, right? So unless we want to make more exceptions of what would not be subject to 91A, which I'm not sure if that's what the direction you want to go in or not.
Yeah, I mean, just not having gotten a chance to look at it, I suspect we could also just remove section 2 and accomplish what I'm proposing. But I haven't gotten a chance to myself look at the statute, so I just don't want to do something unintentional.
Research time.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, thanks.
Any other discussion on 284? That is, we'll hold it at least until next week, if not longer. We can have a short discussion on HB 392, but I do not anticipate taking any committee action on it today. Certainly, the bill raises a lot of questions which have been raised in various forums as to what you can and cannot do for limiting Article 5 conventions, including right in Article 5 of the Constitution, where it tells us the purpose is for proposing amendments. So I personally have a question as to if that's what the definition of it is in Article 5. You know, how can you pre-limit what you can hear? If there's any other discussion, we'll certainly take it at this point. Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was one of those who, when they would hear about Article 5 conventions, I would have concerns. Well, once you have the convention, it can turn into something that was not intended. So I feel that the intent of HB 392 is to narrow the authority, so if you would agree to go to participate in one of these conventions, that it's done in a way that they're not going to, you limit the authority of the people you send to perhaps further the will of the people. So I do like the intention of this. Now, whether does this frustrate other issues? Potentially. I think that's what we need to figure out. The concept, the general concept, I think, is a good idea. I'm not sure if this accomplishes everything you want.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I would agree we should hold this till next week at least.
Yep. All right. Going back to bills we've heard in the past, I think we've got 3. Get out the list here.
Yeah, I have a copy, sorry.
Did I hear somebody said they had a question?
No, Mr. Chair, I was referring to House Bill 296. We have a copy of your amendment.
Okay.
That's what we were looking at.
We'll talk about that one first then. Okay. So my amendment is number 2023-1236S. It is the language that was presented to us from the fire marshal. I believe we've all received communications from the fire marshal. I've also received information from the firm that's representing the fire chiefs and stuff, that after reviewing the fire marshals, that they do not oppose this. Further discussion before we take a motion.
Chair, I thought the amendment language addressed a lot of the concerns we heard in the hearing, and with only providing a minimum to accommodate the fire chiefs and making sure that there's a place procedurally for their feedback to be incorporated into the local process. I think this amendment does a good job at moving the issue forward.
Okay. Further discussion? Do I have a motion?
To pass?
Ought to pass by Senator Susie. Chair seconds. Further discussion?
Ought to pass on.
Move ought to pass on the amendment by Senator Susie, seconded by the chair. Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And moving on to the ought to pass as amended motion. And do I have any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Nay.
I would move
Ayes have it.
consent.
Senator Susie moves consent,
Second.
and Senator Murphy seconds that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, and I will take that one out.
These two.
Yeah, 75 and 87, certainly we will know what we need to do or not to do with those, hopefully, by the end of next week. We've got a couple that are re-referred. I'll look to the committee assistant. Is there anything that I haven't addressed that I should have on our list of bills to exec?
Don't you hate that?
With House Bill 75 on hold, House Bill 87 on hold. The actions that we took today is 203, 237, 284 we've considered, and 392 we've considered. I think that we're pretty much right up to date. We've got the two bills, 154 and 197, that we will be hearing next week. And we'll try to make it 9:15 next week. I don't know of any conflicts for there. So I think that we're right up to date. We'll see how many more bills that the House gives us. Senator?
So on Tuesday, the 11th, I have a conflict in the morning.
Yep.
Just a reminder, I will get here as soon as I can, but
Yep. And,
take your time in commerce.
depending on how the various other committees, your primes, my primes, work out, certainly, depending on how the testimony goes on 154 and 197, we may do the same thing that we did today, is have the hearings, take a recess, if that works out for people to be here later in the morning, and try to do what we can. But we're not going to push you. We're going to try to give you the time. Since we have the time, the one discussion that has to happen is whether or not there's enough financial information in 392, since it's the only FN we have, that would require it to go to finance. If you look at the bill itself, the things that are in there is the amount of money for prosecution, the amount of money it takes to incarcerate somebody, the amount of money for those, which, if I'm holding something up to go to finance because of that, I don't think I've done my job in the budget to begin with. So I don't see a lot in there that would preclude me as a member of finance from making the decision to waive it. But I'm willing to listen because the costs that I see in there, we don't know how many people are going to commit murder. We don't know how many people are going to commit other felonies that it's going to cost. And that's the reason that they have a budget, is to do it. And the reason we have fiscal committee that can take action and adjust their budget. So,
How many people are going to violate their oath to an Article 5 convention?
again,
Right?
So
Probably not very many.
but I don't know how many other things that are going to go on out there. So just keep that in mind as you go, because with the Senate schedule the way it is, I have cautioned the Senate President and the other chairs of the committees that since we are like 3 weeks in a row during prime Finance Committee meeting time, not going to be having session, it's going to either give us a big bow wave that we have to take care of first, or a tsunami afterward that's going to come wipe us out. So do want to process as much as we can, and do want to make sure that finance gets the things they want but doesn't get other things that they don't need. So any other comments from any of the senators? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
We have a motion by Senator Murphy, seconded by Senator Susi, to come out of executive session. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are out of executive session. And our business of the day being completed, we are adjourned. I feel fine. Saturday I felt terrible,